Welcome attendees. Allow me to introduce to you Dr. Vidya Shah.
Good evening and welcome. We are so happy that you have joined us for our first of 5 online webinars as part of the York University Faculty of Education Summer Institute 2020, Up Close and Personal, more lovingly known on Twitter as #FESI 2020. My name is Dr. Vidya Shah, and I'm an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at York University and the moderator for tonight's discussion on designing for criticality and community. I'm also a proud member of the organizing committee of the Summer Institute, alongside Dr. Carl James at York University, Jack Negro, superintendent at Durham District School Board, and seconded faculty members and FESI co-chairs Saima Chowdhury and Sultan Rana at York University. For those of you who are new to the Summer Institute, it began about 12 years ago through the York Center for Education and Community, a wonderful initiative that brought together community and educators under the direction of Dr. Carl James, Dr. Sarah Barrett, Dr. Khaled Barkoui, Dr. Teresa Shanahan, Dr. Don Dippo, and numerous seconded faculties at the time, Donna Ford, Jacqueline Spence, Ramon San Vicente, Allison Games San Vicente, Chris D'Souza, and more. There were also members from other faculty, such as Dr. Ranu Basu and Dr. Narda Razak. And this is the basis upon which the Summer Institute was formed. The Summer Institute operates under the premise that the education system was founded on colonialism, white supremacy, and other intersecting forms of oppression. And if left unexamined, we continue to perpetrate these systems of oppression in our educational structures. FESI brings together community partners, educators, researchers, and policymakers to think collectively towards disrupting these long-standing educational inequities. Tonight, we have over 1,000 people joining us from both Canada and the United States. And I encourage you, wherever you are in this virtual space, to acknowledge the lands on which you are currently situated, that your feet are currently on. For those of us in the Greater Toronto Area, I would like to acknowledge our presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations who have lived on this land for thousands of years. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. As treaty people, I would like to acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and acknowledge that this territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. We would also like to acknowledge and pay respect to histories of Indigenous resistance to colonization and white supremacy, and to ongoing acts of resistance and resurgence through Indigenous scholarship, art, poetry, social movements, industry, medicine, spirituality, and more. As a settler on these lands, I am grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and I am keenly aware of my responsibilities. As PhD candidate Dwayne Brown stated earlier this summer, there continues to be gross indignities and inhumane acts of oppression. The missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls across Canada, the environmental degradation of sacred waters and land due to resource development policies, the need for major public investments in Indigenous education, healthcare, social services, water infrastructure, and housing to provide even basic access to rights and well-being, state-sanctioned violence and murder against Indigenous people, our shameful history of residential schools, the impact the Indian Act has had and continues to have on Indigenous peoples, and more. Since colonization, education has been weaponized as a tool to inflict and commit cultural genocide against Indigenous peoples. By knowing and grappling with our history and our present, we have a professional duty as educators to repair damages done in the name of education and civilization. To understand that schools are often conflicted and unsafe spaces for Indigenous students and families. We acknowledge the innumerable apologies and the fact that the 94 calls to actions outlined in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission have yet to be fulfilled. We draw our attention in particular to calls 62 and 63, which focus on how we can work towards reconciliation through education. We understand that the goal is not simply equity, rather Indigenous self-determination and governance, which is upheld by the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge this current time that we are in, where we are seeing an upsurge of awareness of how whiteness and white supremacy have and continue to construct anti-Blackness and perpetuate anti-Black racism politically, economically, socially, mentally, emotionally, psychically. We are also seeing a simultaneous commitment to stand in solidarity with Black life. However, many of these commitments are performative in the form of public statements and tweets, in that they do not address the systems, the structures, the policies, the institutions, the ideologies that give rise to state-sanctioned violence and murder of Black people by the police, the disproportionate number of Black and Indigenous children in care, racist detention and deportation policies towards Black migrants, grave inequities in housing, social services, justice, immigration, and healthcare towards Black people, and more. As author Robin Maynard shares in her book, Policing Black Lives, these inequities are contemporary manifestations of the large-scale exploitation of Black lives and labor under the transatlantic slave trade, which was only abolished in Canada in 1834, and racially segregated schools, the last of which closed in 1983. That's less than 40 years ago. While there is a growing awareness of anti-Black racism, we have seen only minimal calls to action that actually disrupt the presence of white supremacy and anti-Blackness directly, and instead speak of anti-Black racism as historical, as in slavery, as not of this land that some call Canada, in drawing comparisons down south, or not of this particular institution, in this case, education. In Ontario schooling, anti-Black racism is rampant. It manifests in the disproportionate punishment, suspension, and expulsion of Black students, the streaming of Black students into locally developed and applied classes and particular special education classes, and the simultaneous streaming out of gifted classes, French immersion programs, specialty arts programs, and more. The dehumanization of Black families and communities as they interact with schools and school officials, curricular violence that exists in the erasure of the histories, realities, and aspirations of Black diasporic people in Canada, assessing students' achievement, behavior, and character against white logics that often end up pathologizing them as deviant, as defiant, and as criminal, the adultification of Black children and the denial of Black childhood innocence and vulnerability, and more. This, in part, creates the context and the history that informs today's discussion, designing for criticality and community. When we speak about designing, we're speaking about envisioning, about creating, about imagining, about dreaming, about futurities. But of course, this begs the question, what do we need to dismantle in order to create anew? How can we engage in the creative destruction of policies and structures that for far too long have disadvantaged particular populations of students, Black, Indigenous, and other racialized groups, students living in poverty, students with disabilities, Muslim students, 2S LGBTQI+ students, students struggling with mental health, and more. So today we will also be speaking about troubling, about questioning, about disrupting, about dismantling, about abolishing. And with the recognition of the importance of community as integral to every aspect of schooling, we will also be speaking about responsibility, interconnectedness, and relationality. The idea for this webinar came about because we noticed a serious gap. While there is increased awareness of issues related to colonialism and racial justice, especially for Black lives, thanks to community activists and educators that have committed themselves to educating all of us, the policies, structures, decision-making processes, and curriculum that guide our work as educators are still deeply rooted in colonial, white supremacist, heteropatriarchal, ableist, neoliberal logics. These divisive logics create winners and losers, haves and have-nots, good and bad, innocence and guilt, capability and ineptness, and lead to the disproportionate and disparate outcomes that we see in student achievement, well-being, and experience. So if you're joining us today as a community member or a parent, we welcome you and we encourage you to think about designing for activism and movement building, to hold schools and systems responsible to the well-being and success of all children. We need you as part of this discussion. If you are a system leader or policymaker, we welcome you and we encourage you to reflect on designing policies, structures, and practices that center students most marginalized in and by the system, and actively engage community at every step. We need you in this discussion. And if you work in a classroom, we welcome you and we encourage you to reflect on designing pedagogically in ways that center relationships, critical consciousness, anti-racism, and wellness for yourselves and for your students. We need you in this discussion. And we encourage all of us to blur the lines between community activists, activist educators, activist leaders, and activist scholars. In a moment, I will introduce our esteemed panel. But before I do, I'd like to encourage you to use the hashtag FESI 2020 throughout today's presentation. I first learned what it meant to trend on Twitter 2 years ago at the 2018 Summer Institute, and we're hoping that we can trend again tonight. There will be tremendous learning happening tonight, and we encourage you to share your thoughts, insights, resources, and quotes from today's presenters on Twitter using the hashtag FESI 2020. It's an important way for us to keep track of resources and ideas so that if folks want to go back and follow the discussion, there's a place that they can go to. So again, hashtag FESI 2020. Tonight, we will hear from our 3 speakers for 15 minutes each, and then we're going to have some time for questions and answers at the end. So please be sure to include your questions in the YouTube live chat, which will be moderated by Sultan Rana and Saima Chowdhury. Given the time restrictions, we're not going to be able to get to all of the questions, but what we're going to do is group them by theme and hopefully get to a good number of them before the webinar is over. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists in the order in which they will be speaking. So first, we have Elizabeth, or Dori Turnstall, who is a design anthropologist, public intellectual, and design advocate, who works at the intersections of critical theory, culture, and design. As Dean of Design at Ontario College of Art and Design University, OCAD University, she is the first Black and first Black female Dean of a Faculty of Design. She leads the Cultures-Based Innovation Initiative focused on using ways of knowing to drive innovation processes that directly benefit communities. Welcome, Dori. Next, we have Kimberley Tavares. Kim is an education officer cross-appointed to the Education Equity Secretariat and the System Evidence and Design Branch in the Ontario Ministry of Education. She serves as an educational policy and systems advisor and the equity and literacy lead, respectively. Kimberley has been seconded from a vice principalship in the York Region District School Board, and prior to this was an equity officer in the York Region Board, serving students of African and Caribbean heritage. Much of Kimberley's work in the ministry is to develop innovative tools and resources that work to dismantle the systemic barriers faced by many students in the Ontario education system. Welcome, Kim. And finally, we have Natalie Wood, who's a professor in the service work program at George Brown College, who often describes herself as wearing 3 kinds of bow ties. And you will see in a moment, she has a fancy one on tonight. Natalie is first a social innovation specialist, co-founder of the George Brown College Social Innovation Hub, who designs and performs change within institutions and communities. Second, she's a PhD student and uses her research time to challenge the devastating impact of anti-Black racism through documenting and developing Afro-Caribbean diasporic-inspired community organizations and models of empowerment, healing, and inclusion. And third, she is an award-winning visual and multimedia artist. Welcome, Natalie. So Dori will be speaking to us first about an interconnected approach to design thinking. Following, Kim will then share insights on critical approaches to design thinking for school district decision-making protocols. And finally, Natalie will share critical approaches to design thinking for community activism. And speakers, just a reminder, we'll give you a 5-minute and a 2-minute warning, and then we will jump into Q&A after. So Dori, I will turn it over to you. great, Dori. If you just want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm muting. Thank you again for this wonderful invitation. I'm so honored to be with these amazing panelists, Natalie and Kimberly. So we're gonna have a really interesting conversation. So I'm just gonna give a little bit of an overview in terms of what does it mean to think about the decolonization of design as a way to think about an interconnected approach to design thinking. Many ways there's been a lot of criticality addressed to design thinking, but I think if we separate design thinking from its mass media conversations and popular figures in terms of IDEO and other places, that the approach in and of itself could be part of a process of decolonization. And I'll use the own work that we've been doing at OCAD University in terms of our Indigenous cluster hire, but also most recently our Black cluster hire, to talk about kind of how you can use design thinking as a way to shift. So I'm going to talk about these in 6 steps, just because I don't have a lot of time. And so I will get to the main point of it. The first part of this process is really putting Indigenous demands first. And what that means for us at OCAD was really making a deep commitment to Indigenous ways of knowing, making a deep commitment to increasing our diversity, including Indigenous faculty members, and really asking the question of the community, what does decolonization mean to them? So a lot of the process that we used to do this was very much about design thinking processes, getting our community to articulate the meanings in public spaces, working through our own processes. So the picture of the buffalo at the bottom of this image with the word respect, this is the work of one of our Indigenous faculty members, who Howard Monroe, who's a Red River Métis. And the work he's doing in terms of actually taking the design process and realigning it so that it connects to the 7 grandfather teachings. And so there's a way in which we've taken a design thinking approach, but we're also challenging that approach and integrating it with Indigenous ways of knowing and Indigenous ways of being as part of that transformation of design in and of itself, but the transformation of our institution. Second part is really owning up to the institution's racism and white supremacy. This was done in many, many different ways, and this is also an ongoing process. But one of the main catalysts for this was, at the time, President Sarah Diamond established a task force on underrepresentation. And again, had community consultation. So you can see the image of the Alphas hours there was a survey that was conducted, and then out of that came sort of recommendations, including one to priority hiring for given racialized and self-identified Indigenous peoples, and also establishing population data, and so that we can know and track how we are supporting our Black, Indigenous, and POC faculty, staff, as well as administration. But also calling into question, again, the white supremacy of the institution in and of itself. So we held roundtables on whiteness without white supremacy, because again, in my faculty, 80% of the population is still white. And so part of it is providing them with tools and resources to do the work themselves around understanding white supremacy and how to position themselves within structures of white supremacy. And one of the things that was really important is, looking at the work of Tima Okun in terms of understanding white supremacy as a set of cultural behaviors and expectations, and then being able to propose in many ways alternative values around that. And so once we move to having those discussions of white supremacy as a culture, that a lot of the white fragility disappeared, which then has allowed us to move forward and have deeper conversations about the institutional racism and dismantling the white supremacist structures that exist within our culture. I mean, I think Natalie and Kimberley are going to talk about this much more deeper, but it's also really important to establish authentic relationships to BIPOC communities. And so this is me everywhere. Everywhere where there's community, there's an image of me being part of that, and at many different levels. So, you know, this is me at conferences. This is me in the shops in, you know, Kensington Market. This is me attending every first Friday for my first year and a half, being at OCAD University, connecting through youth, through our Black Reach workshops that we do as part of our Black Youth Design Initiative. And so it's really important to be present in community in ways that are not extractive, but where you're seeing as part of the community in ways that are generous, open, and about providing access. For me, one of the happiest days of my career was when we received all these emails from community members to use our space of OCAD. This is pre-COVID-19. And what was great was the sense of entitlement that they felt to have access to those spaces and have access to them when they wanted them and where they wanted them. And that was really a lot of hard work of being present to get the community to the point where they felt that they were entitled to the resources of OCAD University. And so that's something that you want to be part of the transformation you're trying to make. And then, so one of the things that we've been really doing a lot at OCAD University, again, is hiring. And not hiring, like not net new hiring. So OCAD University, we are rich in culture, we are rich in history, we are not rich in resources. So a lot of the hiring that we've been doing is just made as faculty members retire or as faculty members leave to go to the other institutions, using the openings that we have to increase the diversity of our faculty members. Again, we have the Ontario Human Rights Code that allows for special programs in which you can do what's called positive discrimination, where you find there's underrepresentation. And so we've been using that really effectively to increase the diversity of our faculty. But this is only possible if you make the call in such a way that community will respond. And one of the things that we learned from our Indigenous cluster hire was to begin to shift our language. So we talked about recruiting self-identified Indigenous candidates from Turtle Island. So again, referencing Indigenous owned perceptions of land and space instead of saying, you know, from Canada or the US or these colonial terms. For the Black cluster hire, we were able to go a little bit deeper in terms of really, first of all, openly embracing the intersectional Black identity lived experience. One of the key words we use is we want your lived experiences of Blackness to be part of our institution. And then we signaled that we're interested in the topics you're interested in. We didn't ask for an interaction designer. We asked for, are you interested in Black speculative futures? Are you interested in storytelling as it relates to representations of Black lives? Are you engaged with hip hop or other Black cultural aesthetics? And so as we went through this process, many of the candidates said to us, they cried when they saw the position, the job description, because it was the first time in a job position that their full, wholesome Black identities was signaled as something valuable and desirable by an institution. And they came, like, everyone's worried, like, where's the pipeline? If you write the job description in a way that it speaks to community, they're there in droves. And so I think that's a really important part of, like, in design thinking, we talk about, like, understand and know who your users are, but we never apply that same thinking into the way in which we write a job description. Because if you, again, we've had things where we called for interaction designers and we only get like 1 or 2, maybe 3 Black candidates. Again, if you speak to the community and the things that are interested in them, again, At the end of our search, we probably had about 150 candidates, right? And that's a huge difference. Okay, define qualification standards that take into account systemic exclusion. One of the things that we love in design thinking is creating personas. And in this case, we had to create personas. We had the persona of the traditional academic. But then we realized if we only accepted candidates who look like that, we're going to be excluding everyone, which will defeat our purpose of trying to build inclusion and diversity because of the structural barriers it takes to be an individual who've accumulated all those traditional academic accomplishments, right, that we're looking for. And so what we did is we said, okay, there's really smart Black people who exist outside of this system and have done really, really well. What would their profiles look like? And then let's build up those profiles of equivalencies in some ways, but they actually also bring something very different. And we're gonna make sure that for our cluster hire, that we have candidates who meet all three of these different profiles. So if you're a Praxis Star, may not have been teaching in 2 years in post-secondary, but you may be giving like workshops or design media workshops to university or students or other places because they called you in. As a community connector, you may not have written like a SHRC grant or any other sort of academic grant, but I assure you, you've probably written grants to get your programs funded, right? So all these things that we look for is like, can you transfer knowledge from one generation to another? Can you speak eloquently about what's important and meaningful for you? These are the things that we look for in the traditional academic, but also comes in a different persona that, again, would have been structurally excluded from post-secondary institutions. And then hire in threes, or hire in critical mass, and I'll explain the reason why you should think about it in threes. So this as of June 3rd, 2020, are almost all, not quite, we're missing one member of the Black faculty, the full-time Black faculty at OCAD University. And it's one of those things that this happened because with me coming in as the Dean of the Faculty Design, OCAD finally had hired in threes. And what I mean by that is that they had someone at the top who had real power in terms of being able to write the job descriptions, negotiate the budget, to be able to rewrite the criteria of evaluation. So that was me coming in, having that power, but I wouldn't have even been possible to arrive if it didn't have people in the faculty who are at the middle level as influencers, right? So there were people who had to be on the committee to even hire me, being able to influence the committee and influence their peers as to why the change and transformation needs to happen in the institution to begin with. And then in our case, we have people at the entry level who are students who need to be supported in terms of growth. So the only way, if you're trying to do diversity and inclusion, the only way in which you know it is working is if you have someone who is in power. You have people, again, in the middle who are influencers. They're able to change the conversation that is happening on a committee or in a room or whatever. And you have those who are there to grow, right? Who need to be supported to grow. And so if you're just hiring like, you know, a VP of diversity and inclusion, but you don't have enough faculty to be influencers, you may not be able to make your goals of diversity and inclusion. And again, what OCAD University learned is that, again, had amazing, powerful influencers. Like no one's gonna say no to Lillian Allen and Andrea Fatona, right? But without having that person who had the power to say yes or no and not have that, and have that sway, like have that be the decision, right? Without having that person in power, it took OCAD University 144 years to get 5 full-time Black faculty members in the Faculty of Design. So when you're thinking about critical mass, then you need to hire in threes. That's how you know your system is working. And you know when you get to critical mass is that when the community itself feels that they can bring their full selves into it. Like this weekend, I just had an article in the Globe and Mail about like, what does it mean to create the conditions in which Black people feel free to be free, to be Black, right? And, you know, wonderful thing happened during this meeting. Like you can see the diversity in and of everyone's faces. But what you can't see in this is like all of the accents, which we were able to hear because people felt like they didn't have to mask their accent to speak to one another, right? And so there's all these really subtle things about culture that they bring in when they feel they can be fully and wholly themselves and have that embraced by the institution. So again, interconnected sense of like design thinking. For this entire process, I used the design thinking process. Like we used personas, we used mapping, we used all of those tools that we use for design thinking, but we used them in such a way that, again, it put Indigenous demands first. It helped the institution understand and own its own racism and white supremacy. Again, lots of building deep, 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 authentic relationships so that you understand what are the wants and needs of the community that you're trying to embrace. And then you speak to the community in a way that is interest to them. And then you actually dismantle the structures in your institution that keeps them out. And then you make sure that you have representation in all levels of the institution, and then try to aim for critical mass so that they can feel they can bring their whole selves into the institution. And that's it.
Wow. Dori, I am furiously taking notes on this side. A wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And I know folks are going to have questions for you in the Q&A. And so thank you so much for that. That was so visionary. Wonderful. Thank you. Next up, we have Kimberley Tavares, who will be sharing with us on design thinking protocols for school districts and for schools in general. Welcome, Kim.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Yay, okay. Amazing, Dori, thank you. And Vidya, thank you for a really profound and thoughtful opening between what you said and Dori's connections around what does it mean or look like to decolonize. I hope what I'm gonna say in the next 15 minutes furthers Dori's conversation and thinks differently too around what this can look like. This is particularly thought about in design for a K-12 education system, but thinking about how it can go across other ways of thinking as well. I'll really quickly just give you the quick context behind this. So I worked on an amazing team with two colleagues in particular who were really interested in design thinking when I joined. At the time that I joined, I was coming from schools. I didn't know what they were talking about. But in joining them, we did a lot of learning about design thinking. You know, this was the new thing. Everybody was jumping in, and we wanted to figure out, well, was this a methodology that as a team we could adopt to think about how to work differently with the communities that as educators we service? And we did some amazing learning. But one of the things that really bothered me in what we were learning was that every iteration of design thinking I came across was excellent if you were building a car or building, you know, some kind of machine. But I was terrified because what we were doing was we were taking this and adapting it and applying it to lived people. And there was no consideration for the sociocultural, sociopolitical, sociohistorical context of any of these people. We just had this very neutralized approach, and we're rolling it out to children and rolling it out across, you know, different areas of the province. And I was like, this can't work. We can't do this to people's children. So we sat down and I worked with them to kind of think about this a little bit differently in the context of what does it mean to apply what came out of like a Silicon Valley, you know, user design approach to building things. What could it mean or to think about this from the place of a social justice, equity oriented, decolonized lens to better meet the needs of our most marginalized learners. When I got into where I was, everyone was talking about our job was to solve persistent problems in education. But there was this lack of understanding that those persistent problems were tied to inequity, were tied to injustice and oppression that was falling on the bodies of students. So I would say to people, well, tell me what the issue is. And then as we would strip away the issue, you would realize this was really about underservicing, marginalizing, or oppressing different bodies. So long story short, this is how we have adjusted what, often you will see in some form or another of the design thinking process that we have used with community. We have used in school, we've used it in school at administrator levels and at student levels. We have used it across different groups to think about how do we do this differently and how do we center the people? Like if we're talking about wanting to do right and address persistent problems and address inequity, well then who are you listening to when you are doing this design? At the very beginning, Vidya, you talked about, what was your wording? Our professional duty. And I hear us talk about our ethical duty and we talk about all these things. It's also our legal duty. We have a human rights code that we are tethered to, that we do not enact as much as we need to push people towards practices and actions in education that, that address the marginalization that our students experience. So I'm gonna go through this super quickly if I can figure out how to move your pictures off my screen. There we go. And walk you through this process as we have it developed. All right, here we go. So one of the first areas in design thinking tends to be around the idea of what's your questioning, what's your hunch? We have enough data now, and we are collecting even more data. And through the Anti-Racism Directorate and the data standards for collecting identity-based data and the sharing of this information, we are in a place, Carl James and a number of people, Tana Turner, have been begging, asking, pleading, demanding that we collect data. Boards are now working towards this. Communities have information. The recent data that came out about the disparities of COVID show us that the data exists. But what we've also proven is that the data is only as useful as what we do with it. We have known for years that we have a number of these issues. So we kind of turned that to say, what is the concern you think is happening? What is the disparity that's happening for students? What is a disproportion that you want to address? So we're being very intentional and targeted in how we're thinking through what it is we want to do with this. But with that, and to Dori's point, this is a two-streamed approach because you're looking at what it is that is being kind of done out there, but you're also paying attention to who you are and what you are doing and how your own biases, how your own lenses and your beliefs are intersecting with what it is that you are working to do. I know I'm speaking quickly, it's 15 minutes, so forgive me. I will do my best to be as clear as I can, as succinct as I can. And so in each stage of the process that we developed, we have the actions, but the actions come after the critical questions that we need to ask. Who is a marginalized or underserved group you want to work with? And not work on, not fix, not address, but work with is important for us in terms of that community, reciprocal, iterative approach to design. And then we have the actions that go with that in terms of, well, when you think about what the issue might be based on what your data has, based on what families have come in, because data in all forms, qualitative and quantitative, are important here, what your staff are telling you, what is going on, what do you think is happening? And then you start to probe a little bit of what you think is happening. Where things really become different to traditional learning models, in education, we are excellent at telling people what to do. As administrators and senior leaders, we love to sit down and tell families they need to do better. I love when people will call and say, your child is having a really rough time at school. Is anything happening at home? Because it's not conceivable that the issues that the students are having are actually stemming from coming into an oppressive, racist, sexist, homophobic, pick your ism place, but I digress. But what we're asking here is that this is not about what experts on the outside think. This is not necessarily what the books, et cetera, think. You are listening to the people who are experiencing the disconnect, the oppression, who are experiencing the marginalization. And so you listen openly. And I go back to and now I'm going to go blank on her name, Jen Gilbert's work around what does it mean to listen with hospitality, and to listen openly to what people who have the problem are telling you. So it doesn't begin with experts in a boardroom, it begins with users, and it begins with humility, knowing that just because you have your degree or you've gone to school, that does not trump lived experience. That does not trump living experience and the different contextualities and intersections by which you experience what you are going through. And when you listen critically, again, we have these critical questions that you have to ask yourselves as designers, as leaders, and then the actions that you take with the groups that you're working with. What are your biases? And how might they get in the way of you listening? What privileges makes it difficult for you to contextualize or think differently? I know there is a conversation around, do we work within a system or do we change the system? And everything that's happening with Black Lives Matter right now, we are sitting at a very interesting and precarious intersection. Well, what does it mean to not live in binaries and do both? How do you hear what is being said? How do you address what is being said? And how do you dismantle if what is being said doesn't work? From there, the third step is you co-develop the question. So this, again, is not me after I've heard what students have told me or I've heard what community has said, go back and do this. That community is at the table developing with. I don't think for anybody, but we craft the questions together, what it is that we want to address in our system. And so I always use the example, there was a school that when they looked at their data, their very first stage was asking why students, this is a secondary school, why students weren't taking their courses in school, why the students were taking the courses in night school, private school, etc. Through this process, when they got to this stage, after listening to the students, they changed their question to ask, how do we develop a program that is reflective of and responsive to our English learners so they don't take our courses elsewhere? And they could only make that transition because they listened to what students were saying about what their needs were versus what we were offering, about how our canonical text did not meet their needs and what they needed was practical things for the STEM and other fields that they were moving into. So how do you listen? And again, whose voice is being centered in the design? Is this mine because I have a PhD and I have a degree and I know, or are you listening to the people who've lived and understand and have multiple contexts by which they engage in the work? And then is what I love is the fun part. This is where you get to do things differently. This is where you get to come up with ideas, and you're coming up with ideas informed by the user. They're designing with you. And so you get the space to say, don't limit yourself right now to, well, what about our funding? What about this? In the design stage, just come up with what could be another way of approaching, what could be a different thing that we could do. We get so stuck in Western heteronormative ways of approaching things that sometimes we don't allow ourselves to say, well, what would happen if we designed differently? What would happen if we didn't have to think about periods in the day? Or what if we didn't have to think about gendered learning opportunities? Or what if we could put grade 4 students with grade 8 students for this learning opportunity? You know, what could that mean? What is going to happen? COVID has proven to us that all the things that we have said were barriers that prevented, now that there has been a crisis, we have found a way to move those barriers. And it is that same kind of thinking and urgency that can be used to innovate differently. And then after you innovate, you implement, you try things out, and you try it out with various user groups. We know that there is no monocultural group. So even if you are working with what quote unquote are the Black students in your school, there are various forms of Blackness. And what I, as a second generation person whose mother was born in Jamaica but grew up here, is experiencing somebody who's very different, that who's just coming here from the island versus someone who's coming from continental Africa versus someone who's been here for 3 generations. So how are you thinking about the various user groups? How are you implementing and adjusting? Vidya, I can't see. How much time do I still have?
There's about 5 minutes left, Kim.
Perfect. Okay. And so as you implement, you adjust as you are moving forward. But all of this is done with the user. None of this is done with your student groups or your community groups or somebody separate, but they are a part of the process. And that is what makes this very different. So if I'm going to bring this to you, you're going to say, well, this might work here, but I can't see how this will adjust in this part of the environment. Or What do I do here? What this group of students, you know, they are currently in a place of poverty because of X or Y. How do we address differently for them because they don't qualify for busing? So you temper, and you are responsive, right, to the needs that come at you when you are doing this. And then when you're done, one of the things that we are really not good at is sharing. And it's not sharing for praise, but sharing for adaptation. So how do we create the conditions where across different groups, we can learn from and with each other and adapt things to say, well, this could work for you if we adjust this, or here's a skeleton of what we did. So you share it out. Here I do use a practical, oh, sorry, let me go back one more. Just in terms of sharing, are we listening honestly to concerns? One of the things that gets very problematic is that once we come up with an idea, we get so connected to that idea that it's hard for us to hear, well, maybe that won't work in this context. Or we've put so much effort in that we get emotionally invested that we can't step back, and we lose the focus of what our user needs to our own egos to say, but I did this and this is the work. It's not about that. So are you paying attention to your lens? Are you paying attention to your own bias as you design? Are you paying attention to your actions? Are you coming in as the expert leader? Or are you going in with the groups who worked on the design? And is this a shared, distributive, collaborative leadership approach? How are you engaging in the work? If a particular idea, it's not time for it, you never throw it away. You hold on to it. You don't know where it's going to come back later. There are a number of projects that I've been assigned to work on that we thought were going to move forward. They didn't get to move forward. I didn't press delete. I held them because in other things that we do, in other ways, they're coming back, and we're finding other ways to continue to disrupt the system with the different ideas we have, but maybe not this way, that way. And so we adjust accordingly. And so do we look for opportunities to share, or do we keep a kind of, selfish, it's mine, I'm not going to lend it out to anybody approach? How are we doing that? And then you're never finished. You're going through the process again. So once you feel like you've kind of done this, what is the next thing that we need to work on to better the experience of students in our school? What do we need to do to address the disproportionalities? What do we do to address the disparities? When we see it, how are we working towards it? And what is the next time that you are moving forward? And so through the entire process, which centers the user, which understands and asks you to suspend your own ideas and beliefs, but enter from what they are saying, and being ready to make the adjustments. The leaders who are involved have to be ready, if you're going to engage in this, to act, to say, okay, you've put this in, I'm now committed to doing this work. And through PD, through performance plans, through different mechanisms, how are we holding people accountable to ensuring that the work is moving forward? I'm thinking, based on the chat, that I see 3 things. My time is up, 1 minute warning. So I'm going to leave it there, but this is the process as it goes through.
Kim, thank you so much for sharing. That was so wonderful. And I want to thank you as well, because it was this presentation in a class that I teach in the Master of Leadership and Community Engagement program that launched amazing projects around wicked problems in community. And this presentation and the conversation that you had with the students in that class was phenomenal, and launched today's idea. So thank you so much for that, Kim. Much appreciated. Natalie. We are turning over to Natalie, and Natalie's going to share with us critical approaches to design thinking for community activism. Welcome, Natalie.
Now you can hear me. Hello, everyone. So thank you very much for having me. My phone rings. Sorry, should have put that on mute. Thank you for having me on this panel. I feel so honored to be with sharing this panel with Dori and Kim. And what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to, some of what I want to say you've said already. So I'm going to try and bring in some specific examples. On on the screen right now, I've got assumptions that I've put up. And so, I just wanted to just touch briefly on, I'm coming from a place where education is not politically neutral. Education can often tend to reproduce the same problematic relationships, basically what you were talking about earlier, Vidya. And that we are aware that the educational system is failing some students, right? In particular, Black and Indigenous students. Let's see. So what I want to do is I will talk a little bit about the hub, and then I will talk a little bit about one tool that we've used in the hub. The hub ran from 2014 to 2018. It was 3 things: an alternative placement, an early stage incubator, and a connector for students to generate innovative ideas, projects, and social enterprises. We had a vision, and our vision was a world where social entrepreneurship and innovation contribute to economic and social justice. And those 2 areas are key for us: economic and social justice. Our mission, we aimed at creating a sustainable ecosystem that graduates students with the skills to pursue the development of socially innovative and entrepreneurial activities. Throughout the slides, I have 4 or 5 slides, you will see pictures. The pictures in the slides are actual pictures of the Hubsters. Anyone who's been through the hub is called a Hubster, and when they graduate, is called a Hubstar. So this was the impact, okay? The hub itself, 81 Hubsters came through the hub. Out of those 81 Hubsters, we had 18 social enterprises being created. We had 37 innovative projects, and then, about 55 partners, internal and external, and we had some opportunities for revenue and job and revenue generating opportunities. Our hub created opportunities and created student pathways where students were able to take courses so that they can develop and understand social justice principles, social innovation practices, social enterprises. And then what we did was we provided them with opportunities, the tools to actually practice the tools and to apply the tools that we had taught them. So what's key in all of this is that the designer becomes the individual with the lived experience, okay? So we don't have a situation where an expert is coming in and going to the community and saying, hey, what can we do? How can we empathize? All of this stuff. Instead, the students themselves get the tools and they get to adapt it to the ways that they need to adapt it. On the right side are examples of some of the projects and ventures that the Hubsters engaged in. The middle one, Taj Hub, is Simone Walters, and Simone is a mother whose son was murdered in the Jane and Finch area. And she came into the hub wanting to unite the 4 corners of Jane and Finch so that there could be a way to create change and to move everyone together, and to develop the community in that respect. She worked with Toronto Community Benefits Network, with CAPG, and was able to secure a contract with Metrolinx to have a space where the hub could be created. Now, in the past few weeks, Metrolinx has reneged on that contract. So the community is now struggling and trying to sort out what they're going to do about that. So let me move on. One of the things, along the lines of lived experience, this was a breakdown of who was in the hub, okay? We had 67% of Hubsters who were from equity-seeking groups, 77% were women, 34% Black, we had Indigenous, queer, trans, folks, and 41% had identified they were living with mental health issues. Okay, so imagine, so stay with the fact that this group of people are often not the group of people given the tools to actually go about and create change, right? And for us, what we were hoping to do was to have, as one of the professors working in the hub says, Professor Rick Kelly, he says, we were hoping to have a ripple effect, right? That we tried to create community within the college itself, and that empowering the individuals tied to those communities would have a ripple effect and go out and impact those communities. So, okay, there was a lot of discussion earlier about the traditional approach to design thinking and the problems with it. I echo those problems. The issue of who is the expert and where does community knowledge fit into that. When you talk about empathy, do the designers actually factor in their lenses, their biases when they are trying to be empathetic with the community? And what we had found when we were doing our research and creating the hub was that the process tends to privilege the designer over the community and often reproduces the status quo. Okay, and so I've gone to different social innovation presentations, and folks would be awarded money for developing, for instance, a toilet that you could walk with on your back. Okay, and the toilet, right? And so, and of course, the toilet was a product that was designed that would be flown to India or flown to Africa for people to poop in and then hold on their back and walk, as opposed to figuring out ways to design infrastructure or employment within those communities. Okay, so the fact that it reproduces the status quo, this is the status quo. You mentioned Carl James earlier. These were some of the figures that I pulled out from many of his reports, because there are many, right? We see on one hand, 29% of Indigenous students are not completing high school, right? There is an education to prison pipeline. Streaming is being checked right now, but it was still happening. There are higher rates of suspension for Black youth, higher dropout rates, lower rates of graduation, lower rates of applying to post-secondary education. And when they get to George Brown College, right, we have issues with retention, okay? And so what had happened around 2015, around the time that the hub was running, was there was an identification. First of all, retention was one of the funding streams or funding criteria for the college. So the college was very interested in what was happening to those Black students. And so what we learned was that those students were experiencing discrimination, racism, not being able to find placements, being in placements and experiencing racism in the placement, okay, and not knowing what to do. So when you look at the status quo, right, and you hear the voices of community saying, we need to dismantle, we need to defund, we need to abolish, right? We have to listen to this, because all we've done in terms of reforming or in terms of trying to reform or doing or performing and not doing is we haven't changed. If this is happening, equity has to be central in this equation, right? So one of the tools that I wanted to talk about, so I'm moving really quickly. One of the tools I wanted to talk about was the TP teachings that Cindy Blackstock talks about, Cindy Blackstock and other researchers. So everyone knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we know it as a motivational theory, right? We know the Western perspective of it, which is physiological needs at the bottom, and then you ascend to self-actualization and to transcendental transcendence, right? What Cindy Blackstock was sharing in her research was that Abraham Maslow was actually staying, or I don't know, living with the Blackfoot Nation in Alberta when he was devising his theory. Yeah. And then, so he borrowed, but he borrowed it upside down, right? So the First Nations, so bringing back the Indigenous knowledge, right? And we try to center that. So the First Nations perspective is self-actualization. That comes first. You have to know who you are. You have to know how you're connected to your community, what your social location is, what your history is, what your future could possibly be, what your strengths and what your passions are, right? And from there, you then move into community actualization, and then you look at ways in which the culture could be reproduced. Healthy aspects of the culture could be reproduced. So I've tied this piece in with a model that I often use around systems change, right? And it's a tool that I came across, social innovation group in Toronto was promoting this. You have the inner circle is the inner work that has to be done, right? So I think Kimberley, you mentioned it, and Dori, you mentioned it. When we're doing this work, we have to be able to say who we are, what our social location is, where are our biases, how do we share power, right? What is our privilege? All of those things have to be discussed at that time. Then you've got the systems orientation, which is about systems thinking, system tools, the application of the design tools, and then the actual practice. So some pictures here. So I mentioned what the inner work would be. The picture at the bottom, these are 4 Black hubsters, young women, who created an organization called LIVE, Living in Black Excellence, okay? Here they are with Debbie Young, Anita Frika, okay? Debbie is amazing, okay? They got an opportunity to connect with her, and she has her own system of, a system that is about self-empowerment and empowerment for the Black community. Because whereas someone from a Eurocentric background might have to understand their social location and their biases, a lot more emphasis for our communities have to be on how do we understand our strengths, how do we empower ourselves, and what are the tools that we can use to do that. So this is what you saw happening here. And this group of students talk about ripple effect. This group of students was able to push the college to ask them, to push them and demand, why is it that we don't have an anti-racism policy? What are you going to do to stop the experiences of racism? And you know how they did it? Dori would like this because this is design. They created a poster with Waldo on it, and they said, where is George Brown College's anti-racism policy? Call the president to ask her. And then they put those posters up everywhere, right? And I was like, what? Okay. What they managed to do was they managed to get the college into a position to hire consultants to actually come in and look at what was going on in the college, okay? Okay, so that's that. The systems orientation and the systems thinking incorporates complexity theory, and understanding that the whole is different than the sum of its parts, which means that what Dori and Kim were talking about, the relationships, forming relationships is an absolutely amazing way to shift the hierarchical power structure, which is what was happening in the hub. So the hub said, we are here to do social justice and social change. And folks who were managers, folks who were students, folks who were directors actually showed up to find out more and to help, right? Which meant that the traditional hierarchical model kind of collapsed, within the hub itself, right? And so students were able to access the president, they were able to access managers in ways that they weren't able to before, right? So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about understanding the change, the change-making role of relationships, and identifying problems at the micro, the meso, and the macro level, so that we're actually creating systems change as opposed to creating products where you could poo and put the product on your back. The systems tool, I'm not going to tell you the name of the organization, okay, that created that. Okay, the systems tools, let's see. So that third circle is the systems tools, and I talk about the conceptual framing aspect of it. In the hub and the work that we did, we use critical pedagogy, which is Freire's, Paulo Freire's, engaged pedagogy, which is bell hooks. Both talk about using praxis and a discursive element to change. Engaged pedagogy also incorporates teaching as a transgressive and performative act of freedom. So in other words, you, the teacher, and you, the student, are both experiencing liberation, love, and hope, right? We also incorporated restorative justice frameworks, again, bringing in Indigenous ways of knowing. And this is a concept that builds respectful communities, healthy educational spaces where everyone belongs. And this is key. Everyone belongs. Everyone has an opportunity to repair damage that they may have done. Everyone is aware that they exist within a dynamic, right? That both students and teachers are creating knowledge together, that knowledge is not fixed, that it is actually evolving as the parts come together, right? And we were really focused on Hubsters and students becoming agents of change. The other pedagogical approach is the actual skills sets used, and I'm just going to brush over these, but one of the things, so you could read it, one of the things, of course, is making sure that there's a safe space. And I know right now, given the pandemic, this is critical. Teachers and students need to feel safe within the classroom, right? And if you are not allowing students and teachers, or teachers to teach in a space that is, that allows for less students rather than more students, then you can be recreating conditions that cause health, that recreate the pandemic, that creates basically the second wave of the pandemic. Okay, I'm not sure how much time I have left. 1 more minute. Okay, all right, so let me see this one. Okay, this part is the community activation part. What we did was we created community within the institution, right? And the community we created was a hub. And I cannot stress how important it is to create a space where everyone is welcome, people can drop in at any time, and that you allow for moments of serendipity and kismet and synchronicity to happen. And you know, I said UN and Jane and Finch as an example. We had a mentor who dropped into the hub at the same time, and he dropped into the hub with a UN researcher looking to do research on Jane and Finch. And it so happened that Simone Walters was there at that very moment, right? And that researcher was able to connect with Simone in ways that furthered their research and supported Simone in her development of her Taj Hub. Okay, our tools of empathy became tools of awareness and transformation, right? And let me see, yes. The other piece that I wanted to talk about was the community capital piece. So I know I'm wrapping up. Trust me, I'm wrapping it up right now. Okay. The community capital piece, we often talk about, well, you know, community has to get together and we have to do, you know, this is called social capital and we have to connect with each other and stuff. But we also forget that that community also needs to find ways to bridge with communities with resources. So the community capital piece, the economic issues, the resource issues have to be included in this, right? Because we often say, oh, community has to get together, and when they get together, they could change things, but they also need resources. And so what we were good at with the hub was making sure that we brought funders in to the space so that they can interact with the students and the hubsters. And that's basically it. These are just some reminders. The one reminder here, school and education is often the main approach that marginalized and disenfranchised communities use to try to get ahead, right? So if it is failing them, then we are failing whole swaths of society, right? According to complexity theory, a small change can bring about massive change. And so this piece about understanding, oops, sorry, okay, do you want me to wrap up? I'm wrapping up. The last piece, we can work with the force of social movements, calling for abolition to put forward a design equity approach to rebuilding, okay? So abolition requires some kind of recreation and rebuilding, right? And are we ready for that? That's it. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so wonderful. Thank you for that. So much to think about.
Amazing.
We do have a question. Sorry, go ahead, Simon.
I was going to say we do have a few questions, but I think in interest of time, we're just going to.
I'm not hearing.
Simon, it just your sound just turned off.
Oh, wow. I've just been talking to myself for a whole 30 seconds. My apologies. I was just going to say, we actually have several questions, but just in interest of time, we are going to probably just focus on one. Dori, Kimberly, Natalie, thank you so much. All the feels are happening right now, all the feels. Liberation, love, and hope. I love all the words that were used today. I know that everybody touched on this one question that we're going to have time for in bits and pieces, but I thought we would kind of look at it in an intentional way. Often when we work in organizations and education and communities, there's this tug and pull between the concept of abolition and being really creative, turning things on their heads, naming oppressive structures for what they are, and looking at a responsible deconstruction of the systems that have harmed and continue to harm particular groups of individuals versus a reform kind of structure, which is a more slow, steady kind of working within the confines that have already been set up for us. Is abolition even possible when we have these really powerful structures that continue to dictate kind of all of our spaces and our roles? And as Dori pointed out, often we are excluded if we do tried different approaches. So my question is, given that tug, that tension between abolition and reform, is abolition even possible? What are the opportunities and challenges of both approaches? And how do we move forward? How do we reconcile the two?
So if I can jump in. I mean, someone asked me this question the other day. And I said, like, I'm an and both kind of person in the sense that, again, as you destroy, you must create. As you destroy, you must create. I mean, the thing that we're finding interesting about like the transformation that's happening at OCAD is that we are really dismantling the place in many ways. And so to what extent is it reform and to what extent is it abolition, in the sense of that, like, we are fundamentally changing so many aspects of our structures that in many ways our faculty members feel like we're like building a whole new university from scratch. For me, there was like, I'm always about like, what's the resources question? Because for me, I'm a, and this may be being African-American, that I'm a really strong proponent of reparations. And I see the kind of work that we're trying to do in terms of dismantling, in some ways taking over could be seen. Many of these institutions, by making them truly diverse and inclusive, like, why should I go out and raise whatever, like $14 million to start something from scratch if I can use the $14 million that exist in this budget and try to achieve the same sort of thing? So we have that question of like abolition versus reform. It's really like, how optimistic or pessimistic do we feel about the pace of change? And so when I encounter a structure I can't get past, then I'm like, let's burn it down, right? But when I figure out the way to, to leverage it, to transform it, to redistribute it, then I'm like, yeah, I'm all for rapid reformation, right? And that depends really like on our ability to convince other people, right? And so we can make the change happen quickly if we can get rid of the structures quickly. Then I'd rather use the $14 million that exist in my budget than have to scrounge to try to find another 14 million to build something from scratch.
That's amazing. Thank you, Dori. I like the relativity of it. The pace, it's relative to the pace of change. You're right. So you can't reform really you can't lead without the people coming with you, right? You can't reform without people joining in as well. Natalie or Kimberly, any thoughts on that one?
I think just like everything Dori said, so much yes. I think the only thing I would tie to that is that, to the point of you can't move without the people coming with you, that's also steeped in the level of understanding, education, and willingness of the people. And so I agree, I don't think it's an either or, but I also look at the instances where there have been moments where things have been what we would put under kind of abolished, but the vacuum that's been left has actually done so much more harm and versus what was there before. So what work is being done to make sure that the level of understanding, I know what I'm about to say and I know how scary what I'm about to say is, but I'm putting it out there. I'm very much a proponent of defunding particular police services and moving that money towards other services that do what society needs. I do not think we should be calling the police for mental health challenges. That doesn't work for me. We should not be calling the police on a kindergarten child in a school. I don't even understand that I have to articulate that, but that is our reality. So I'm all for reallocating funds in those kinds of ways. But I also think too, that some of those other institutions are just as mired in the same kind of oppressive policies and practices that the police are. And so are we just going to move into another way? Or what is the very intentional, careful, thoughtful steps that are going to be taken to make sure that what we remove isn't now subsumed by some other bigger vacuum that's also steeped in a white supremacist understanding, culture, and ways of moving forward? That's not going to move us in any way in the right direction. So I don't believe in the dichotomy of either or. I think it is a both, but I think it is a both because one needs to anchor we've been in this intersecting, cross-secting place for so long that it's going to take that time to build and do it, because even, quote unquote, well-meaning people with great intentions, I'm tired of hearing about people's intentions. I don't care what your intention is anymore. I care about your impact. And if we can't reorient ourselves towards impact, then that movement is going to, it's still certain particular bodies at the top with ways of being and ways of understanding that have allowed them to get to where they are, that is still going to create problems for us as we move forward.
To add to that, I would also echo what both Kim and Dori have said. To add to that is, yes, I believe in both almost seem to have to happen simultaneously, and a dismantling process needs to be kind of balanced with community growth, so to speak. So, and I want to reserve the right to decide whether I want to be in the place of or, creating another space in another moment. And so I feel that, I think just to be a bit clearer is, what I found is that with institutions, and institutions where you're not like Dori, you don't have the power, there's no power structure at the top, that could support change. What you have to do is you have to be able to step outside of that and create something in preparation for when that institution caves, because it will cave, right? Because for one thing, the individuals who can bring about change are now no longer focusing on bolstering that institution. They're instead working on other things outside, right? So in terms of either or, I am in that process as well. And I feel very much like, in particular right now, that community is calling loudly, right? That this opportunity to design something new is an opportunity for us to imagine different ways of being, right? And to create space for that imagination and ways in which could education be different for us? Could the systems of prison, like the prison system, does it actually need to exist? Could we incorporate restorative frameworks into the justice system in such a way that, we're not throwing people away, which is what it does. It just throws people away, right? So I'm very much in that place where the institutions will fall, no matter, and the more they have this death clutch, right, the more they're going to strangle themselves and strangle the goodness in them, right? And now's a great time, I think, for institutions like OCAT, like what you were saying, to release some of those resources into the community, which is what you've been doing, right? Because we have to figure out a way to support community. And so including the district school boards, they've got, there are teachers out there who want to help, right? Who want to work with community, who want to form relationships with parents, who form relations, want to, a number of the students in the hub were parents who were trying to create spaces, right? Spaces of change, right? The district school boards have to release some resources. They have to, right? And if not, somebody in the community with money has to be able to create some sort of fund, right? That would allow us to continue to test our ideas out, right? Anyway,
Yes.
enough said.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for that. Several things that are coming to my mind, but I know we are out of time, but I just really appreciate your wisdom. The two things happening together, pace of change, the idea that if you're going to dismantle, you need to constantly create, or maybe create ahead of time. And a lot of the times we replace we try to have something in place, but it's the same oppressive. It's fraught with the same colonial white supremacist structures. And so maybe we keep doing that because we're not listening enough to our communities. And so we can't think beyond what we are socialized to know. And so how do we bring in that community voice so that we are creating radically for that change that's actually going to be impactful? Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Vidya for our final thoughts.
Actually, I was going to just take a moment to come in here. I just wanted to take a brief second to show some gratitude to our attendees, our viewers. We did have close to, at any given point, at one particular point, 500 viewers. So thank you for the live chat that was going. I'm very happy to say it was a troll-free zone. And so thank you for the conversation that was occurring in the chat area. Thank you to Toronto Teach, who posed 2 questions. We are grateful for your questions, and we know very well that you work in the faculty, so we will follow up with your questions. And on Twitter, thank you for all of those who used the hashtag, who spoke of the specific and pointed moments where our panelists spoke to you and spoke to things that you've been mulling on and thinking about, and just wondered if anyone else thought the same thing as you. I think there was a lot of affirmation in this conversation had by our exquisite panelists that finally are speaking truth to things that we've always kind of contemplated. Where we didn't trend, it's a very difficult hill to climb up to compete with Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion right now. So they own the hashtag at the moment, and power to them. It's all good. But thank you so much for the activity that was going on Twitter. And just to let everyone know, this will definitely be shared as a recording in the forthcoming weeks. So stay tuned to Twitter. And so thank you for everyone who came. And I want to pass it on to Vidya.
Thank you so much. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. What a panel. This is our first of 5 sessions for FESI 2020, up close and personal. And this was, what a way to start. I just want to take a moment to thank all 3 of the panelists. I am so humbled and honored to be able to sit here and learn and take in and reflect and continue to reflect. I so appreciate so much of what you shared. Dori, when you talked about the idea of getting community to a space where they feel entitled to the physical space and to the resources, hiring in 3s, really resonated with me. Kim, when you spoke about archiving failed attempts, that they're actually opportunities for learning, and this idea of we are never finished, this unfinishedness that we get to kind of keep coming back to and using as inspiration for innovation, so powerful. Natalie, this notion of self-actualization as a necessary component of community actualization. I think about what our world would look like if self-actualization and community actualization were leadership competencies, that we thought about, how we hire people and how we move people through ranks, what a different kind of system we would have. I want to also take a moment to thank the faculty of education, the dean, the associate deans, all of the staff that made today possible. Behind the scenes doing a tremendous amount of work. We could not have put this on without you. A very special thank you to our co-chairs, Saima Chowdhury and Sultan Rana, who have done a tremendous amount of work and who in these times of COVID are switching what FESI 2020 is looking like on a dime, and they do it with such grace and they do it with such commitment. And so thank you to all of you. To the larger FESI committee, thank you for sticking with us and for staying through all of these conversations. As you know, there are 4 more sessions to come. Our next session is going to be on October 21st. And as we engage in our work with Toronto Catholic Children's Aid and the journey that they're taking, they have had some troubling data that they've come across, and they're going to share with us some really critical and innovative ways that they are responding to that data, that they're mobilizing their resources towards addressing that data and to be responsive to communities. And that discussion is going to be moderated by our very own Dr. Carl James, who has spoken about tonight several times. And a shout out to Tana Turner and Carl James, and especially their report towards race equity. If you have not read that report, we highly recommend it. You could just Google it, Towards Race Equity. It's a fantastic report. Kim spoke of the idea of sharing for adaptation as a central component of this process. And we want to share with you that we invite you to take what you have learned today and to adapt it. This recording is going to be made available to folks. We encourage you to take the ideas from today, take the processes from today, and adapt them into your own spaces. Hopefully, when we are physically together in 2021, we are going to have an opportunity for folks to share what they have learned and what they have done with regards to these processes. So thinking about designing for criticality and community, we're going to have an opportunity for you to share what that looks like in your respective spaces. As we think about starting our new year, this is a moment, and as our panelists have said, this is a moment of reckoning, of starting again, of reaching back to reach forward, of persistence, of resistance, of interconnectedness. And we join you, the Faculty of Education Summer Institute, all of the committee, we join you. We join you as community partners, as educators, as school board staff, as policymakers, as researchers, in thinking together, in acting together, in dreaming together for the future of all of our students. So we wish you all a very safe start to the school year and a very envisioning, critical, community-based start to the school year. And we wish you all the best, and we thank you for joining us this evening, and we'll see you again on October 21st. Thank you.